it's fighting these dogs. There's 3 dogs on it. And I see this thing, and as it steps forward, it's almost like its feet had... I look around, my stepdad and his friend is gone. And I watched this thing slowly come across this field. It was definitely not human. You could tell that it wasn't human. And that's what probably really got me, was just the way this thing was built. It wasn't built like anything I'd ever seen before. I crawled underneath this cedar tree and hid there and watched this thing because I didn't know if it was going to come after me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Monster 911. I'm just getting ready to head out to do a travel sit-down interview with another guest here. If you're new to the channel, my name is Lance, where I do phone interviews, sit-down interviews, investigate at sighting locations, as well as camp overnight to investigate creature sightings, entities, cryptids that are very much alive in isolated areas across the U.S. and across the globe. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. So this next show is very intriguing, and sometimes when I'm at an interview, and I've done hundreds, you have a mind's eye of what the person saw, but there are those times when you're doing an interview, you're not quite sure what they saw, let alone have a name. I have a suspicion or a hunch. And so after you see this show, let me know what your suspicion or hunch is as well. This is a rare case where I had 2 family members that saw this creature. Actually, there was 3, but one is no longer living. But they saw the same creature within like 2 days apart. So we have a confirmed validation of an eyewitness's what they saw, as well as what an adult saw. So this gentleman, he was a teenager when this happened. Years later, in order to reconcile what he saw as a child, a close friend of his recommended that he buy some sculpting clay and sculpt out what he saw. So he did so. And if you have seen anything similar, I'd like to hear from you. Call the toll-free number or drop me an email. And I think you'll find what he sculpted strangely bizarre and physically terrifying.
So it was in '86, and the reason I remember '86, my grandmother had passed away, and I had been given basically back custody to my mother, and my grandmother took care of me most of my life. And so I knew it was that time frame of my life. I pretty knew what the years were, and it was the fall of '86. And the reason I know it's fall because trees are turning leaves, all that good stuff. And when the first thing that happened to us, it was like on a Wednesday. I don't know the exact day, but I remember it's a Wednesday. I was home in the evening after school, and I was out doing yard work in our yard, raking and cleaning and stuff like that. And my stepdad, who, like I said before, was a very abusive, horrible man, he was outside, and he says, "What is that in the sky?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And I look up, and towards the sun setting in the sky, there was this large, looked like a silver reflective mirror beach ball almost. It looked like a beach ball. Like I could see the sun and I could see it, and it looked really small. Well, as we're sitting there watching it, it started getting larger and larger and larger. And at the time, I didn't realize it was moving because it looked like it was just floating in the air there. But as it moved towards us, it got larger and larger and larger. So my stepdad, by this time, my 2 little sisters are out there, and my mother came out. My stepdad told me to run across the street to my neighbor, who lived just probably 100 yards across the street. He had a trailer house over at the time. So I ran over there because my stepdad told him, tell him to bring his rifle. And I thought, man, what is going on? Because I was still in kind of shock of what we were seeing. And so my neighbor, I run over, I get him, he comes back over, and he sees it immediately when he steps out the door because I point towards it. And so he comes over and we watch this thing, and as it gets closer and closer, it kind of comes to a stop. And the reason I knew it came to a stop because it quit getting small or large. And as soon as we seen it, everybody was standing there, look, it just it was gone, darted off, and it was gone completely. No sign of it, no trace, no type of you know, smoke or anything. It was just gone. And so my stepdad kind of, him and my neighbor kind of talked about it, and they're like, well, you know, weather balloons are kind of like that. They're transparent. And this is before the internet or anything else. So all we ever seen was like books and encyclopedias, that kind of stuff, you know. And he said it was probably a weather balloon because we don't live very far from Fort Smith, Arkansas, and they have a weather station there. And there's a military base there and everything else. And where I live in Aikens, Oklahoma at the time was a very small country community. We had one little Aikens store, that's it. And where I grew up, Aikens is where Squiz's home is, and that's the gentleman who wrote the Cherokee alphabet.
Oh, yeah.
And also it's where Charles Floyd and E.W. Floyd lived. Charles Floyd was known as Pretty Boy Floyd. And Salisaw was kind of known for that. We were mentioned in the Grapes of Wrath as a place they stopped in the book, that kind of thing. It's a very small community, but Salisaw is the county seat, and Aikens is just a community out in the country. So as the week went by, and this is another reason I knew it was in the fall, and I would guess to be October is what I'd guess, but not really for sure at that time. I knew it was getting around that time because my stepdad liked to poach deer, and he wouldn't just poach deer because we needed food. He poached deer to sell it or just for the hell of it to go kill animals, you know. And I knew this because I would be the one to carry the battery on my back. They usually have a car battery they put in a backpack, and they'd wire a headlamp to it, and we'd go out and he would shine the deer and then shoot the deer, you know, as deal. So he told me that week, he said, don't have any plans, which I never had plans because the way my stepdad was, I never got to really do anything as a child. And he said, we're going hunting this weekend. I knew what that meant. So Friday came, and he was too drunk and too high to go hunt. So Saturday came, and Saturday night they planned to go hunting. So around 8, 9 o'clock, we started getting everything ready, and then we started up the road. And we go up the road probably 300, 400 meters, and there's an open field where there used to be an old house place, an old log cabin on it, and it kind of set way back up in the woods, and there was an open field in front of it. And we'd always go up to this field, and there was cattle in there. So we know the cattle would come down by the pond, and they would usually nest there. They would, you know, bed down. And we'd go up where the old cabin was, and the deer would come out into the field. They'd spotlight it and then shoot one, and we'd gut it and take it home. And it was always kind of that chancy thing because game wardens were out, that kind of stuff. And he'd already been caught several times by game wardens and different things. And it's kind of a crazy thing because when I came here in '96, one of the game wardens, I was a police officer here, a sheriff's deputy for a short time. He goes, I remember you. And I said, you were the kid that I caught with Tony Coatney all the time hunting. And I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm glad to see that you turned out good, you know, no matter what. So we go up into the field, and it's a moonlit night. And here in Oklahoma, when the moon comes out, it's very bright. You almost don't need no lights to see things. And we're sitting there, and first see the first trickle of does start to come out into the field and start grazing. And then all of a sudden, we hear this commotion. It sounds like rabid dogs, like dogs are just tearing the crap out of something. And we have stray dogs around there. We have coyotes, but we don't have like wolves or anything like that. And out of the darkness of the tree line, I see this animal, this dog. I say a dog, it could have been a coyote. No, I see it come flying out of the darkness and kind of rolls on the ground. It gets up, kind of shakes it off, and right back into the woods. And my stepdad and them, they're just kind of, you know, they've got the light on or anything. They're kind of seeing what's going on. And all of a sudden, I mean, literally, as much as the dog went in, I see this thing kind of break the darkness, the line of the darkness and the moonlight, and it's fighting these dogs. And there's 3 dogs on it, and it's just, it doesn't act like it's really bothering it, but it's more of a nuisance to it. And as this thing steps out, there's an old cabin that would used to be there. It may not be there when we go down there because that property owner's cleaned all that up. But where this old cabin was, there were very large beams that had fell down from this cabin. The roof was collapsed on it. And matter of fact, during the winter, I used to crawl in there and hunt deer out of it just as a hide for watching the deer legally. And so there's big logs across there, and I see this thing, and as it steps forward, it's almost like its feet had appendages, like it had fingers, and it kind of grips the log as it steps forward, and it stands upright. Well, when it stands upright, I look around, my stepdad and his friend is gone. They're gone. They ripped the battery, the cord right off the battery, and they're gone. And I'm underneath, I'm by a cedar tree, so I slide underneath this cedar tree because I don't know where they went. I have no light, I have no weapon, I have nothing. And I watched this thing slowly come across this field fighting these dogs off. And in the moonlight, I could tell that it was almost like it had a tight membrane around it, almost like you would see like when you skin an animal from its fur, like it's a real tight, the fascius on the muscle, kind of a real tight deal, because I could see definition in its legs and its hands and its arms were longer than a regular human. And I knew it wasn't a bear. We have bear down there, but the bear around there are real small, nothing of this thing. This thing, to me, which I was 13 at the time, I would have thought it was 10 foot tall, but I know it wasn't 10 foot tall, but as a young kid, that's what it kind of looked like. I would say probably now, looking back on it, maybe 7'5", somewhere around there, large. It was nothing like I'd ever seen before, and I think the reason my stepdad and them ran is because it was definitely not human. You could tell that it wasn't human. And as I watched this thing go across this field, slinging these dogs, it didn't have a stride to say. It kind of, like, as big as it was, it wasn't like you would think of an ape. It wasn't like an ape, like it wasn't all bulky and low setting or this thing just kind of glid across the property, like it moved its appendages like it wasn't carrying weight, like it was carrying weight on its fingertips on a way, like these appendages hand. And the legs were really odd because it kind of reminded me of a kangaroo because the way the ankles and joints were. And that's what probably really got me, was just the way this thing was built. It wasn't built like anything I'd ever seen before. Well, I was so scared. I'll be honest with you, Lance. I cried. I was crying. I was scared. I crawled underneath this cedar tree and hid there and watched this thing because I didn't know if it was going to come after me or come after them. I didn't ever see anything. I swear I never heard tales of anything like this. And I've lived around the Native American population all my life by then, and they never said anything about something like this. And I've been around bobcats, I've seen bear, I've seen all these things, you know, as a young kid. And I played in those woods my whole life, and I'd never seen anything like this. And I watched it lurk across this field, and as it got into the other part of where the field got into the wood line, it emitted a noise, but I couldn't make out the noise. It wasn't something like you would hear like from a normal animal. It was more of a high-pitched squeal kind of noise. I can't even describe what it would be near as far as what other animal noises make, that kind of stuff. I couldn't describe what actually the noise is. I mean, I know that kind of sounds weird, but I don't have nothing to compare it to.
Right.
But like I said, it didn't look like these animals were taking it down or even causing it any dismay. It was almost like they were a nuisance. So as it crossed the field and it came to the other edge of the wood line and it went into the darkness, I got to leave them a little bit scarier because now I can't see this thing. I don't even know where it is. So like I said, I crawled as far as I could underneath this big cedar tree and hid until daylight came. And when daylight came, I ran as fast as I left the battery, everything there, and just ran as fast as I could to my house. Well, I get to the house, my mom's there. My mom, at that time, she was on dope and everything else, and she was part of the problem too. Like I said, my stepdad was very abusive, and I end up getting put in foster home care because of all of it and stuff. But my mom was concerned, but she wasn't concerned. Like, she didn't come out looking for me.
Gotcha.
My stepdad didn't come out, and my stepdad and his friend, by this time, they're coming up with all these excuses. Well, it was a bear with mange or whatever, and they're not really believing what they've seen. And I told him, I said, I watched this thing come across the field. It stood completely erect. And I said, it almost looked like it could move on all fours if it needed to, but it didn't need to. I mean, it was almost like you took pure muscle and crammed it into a membrane. That's what kind of reminded me of. Well, so Sunday morning goes by, and Sunday night, well, I'd always have to get up real early, about 4 o'clock in the morning, and start my stepdad's breakfast, get his clothes ready for the next day, and if I didn't, I paid for it. And so this was an everyday deal through the week. I had to do this every day. My mom worked at a chicken plant at the time, and so she would sleep in, and he was a carpenter. So I got up that morning. It was Monday morning. It was around 4 o'clock. I got up, made his breakfast, got his clothes ready, ran his bath water, all the stuff that I normally do. And he would always go to the front porch of our house and piss off the front porch. This was a common everyday deal for him.
Okay.
Well, I hear him go out the door, and then I hear him muffling, saying something. He's saying, "Bring me my rifle." And we always kept his rifle on a gun rack in the hallway. Well, my mom heard it. She grabbed the rifle and went to the door. Well, I went out the door too, because I'm like, what in the world's going on? And I looked directly across the way to my neighbor's driveway, the neighbor that we had went and got, and there's something crouched down, and it's kind of crouched down like this, and it's just kind of crouched down, and it's kind of nodding back and forth, and I'm thinking, is that a man? Is there somebody watching us, you know?
Right.
And by this time, I'm still remembering what I just seen a couple of days ago.
Exactly.
And so I'm kind of staying back, because I don't know. I'm thinking, is this that thing? And sure enough, as soon as he got the rifle, this thing stood up, Lance, and it stood fully erect, kind of looked at us, and then took off down the ditch line like a lightning. I mean, just fast. Well, the sun was coming up by this time, and as soon as the sun come up, we went over to where this thing was setting, and you could see where the dirt had been moved, kind of fluffled around the dust. But the ditch line, you could see where the weeds had been parted, but there were no tracks at all. And that's what got me was, I've tracked things all my life as a kid. You know, being out in the woods, I'd see, you know, we hunted raccoon, everything. You look for tracks, all that stuff. There were no tracks to this thing. No tracks at all. And that's what's the most confusing thing. As big as it was, you would think that it would leave some kind of impression in the ground, you know?
Right.
So I never went out in the woods again unarmed. And usually I did. I used to hunt in woods all the time. Me and my friends played them. But after seeing that, it just kind of drove this spike in my head saying, don't go out there. You know, I don't know what's out there. Don't go out there kind of thing. And as it went on, you know, it kind of got bluffed under, and people would say, oh, you've seen a Bigfoot with mange and different things like that. And I would talk to some of the elders in Nycut and the Cherokee community, and they would tell me, you know, there are shapeshifters and, you know, things in their lore. But I went through my whole life with this in the back of my head kind of thing. And so about 4 years ago, and I'd told friends when I was in the service, I joined the military right after I got out of foster home and out of high school. I joined the service, went into the infantry, went to the airborne infantry, all that good stuff. Done my time. I was 11 Bravo with the Bravo 4 identifier, which was a scout sniper. So I'm a trained deserver. I can do a thing. I got out, went into law enforcement. So I'm not just someone that is a dope dealer that people can't have no credibility to it at all. You know, I mean,
exactly.
I've tried to live my life the best and change my ways so my son can have a better future and stop all the, you know, the circle kind of thing.
Right.
And I've always been leery to tell my son about it and tell other people about it, because I always thought people would look at me as, well, you know, is he a little off his rocker, or, you know, is he making this stuff up, that kind of thing. So about 4 years ago, or actually it's more than 4 years ago now, from the first time we talked, a friend of mine works for the movie industry, and he makes we have a 501c3 charity, Everyday Heroes for Children, and we with our business that we have, which we're a weapons manufacturer, federal firearms manufacturer, we also have a charity that we do for children. So he helps make a lot of our costumes. And one day I was telling him about this, and you're not going to believe this, but I need to tell somebody. So I'm telling him about this story, and he says, well, draw it. And I said, I'm not an artist. I can't draw, man. He said, well, I tell you what, I'm going to send you some monster clay. He said, just let your hands go in. And he said, as you remember things, change, move it, sculpt it, and do it to the best of what you believe that you remember, and that'll help your mind kind of get settled with it, and it'll help you come to terms with this. So if you end up sculpting a bear, you know it was a bear. You know, if you end up sculpting something, you know, deal. But if you end up sculpting something that's just out there, then you've probably seen what you've seen, you know. Mm-hmm. And later on, there were movies that came out, and when I was in the service, I tell my friends, this is the best way I can explain it to you. Think of Pumpkinhead. If you think of Pumpkinhead, the movie, that's really similar to what I seen. And people are like, man, that's some crazy shit, you know. Right. I wouldn't say. So I had went on a couple of forums, because the internet, you know how it is. I went on a couple of Facebook forums. There was one for crypto creatures. Mm-hmm. And I'd sculpted this sculpture, and I'd put a picture of it on there. And I get a message, or I get a lot of message from people saying it was a reptilian soldier and all these different things, which I didn't know these things at the point. I did research it afterwards to try to figure out what they were talking about. And so this one guy in St. Petersburg, Russia contacts me. And he goes, I'm in St. Petersburg, Russia. I seen exactly what you've seen. There were 3 of them in my kitchen. I said, in your kitchen? I thought this guy's, you know, why is this thing in his kitchen? Well, he tells me that one late night, he hears a commotion in his house, so he gets up and he's walking down his hallway. And as he gets around the crest of his hallway, he looks into his kitchen. He sees the shoulder and arm of this thing, and he thinks, "Man, this is something not human." So he said, I slid down between my couch and my wall to watch these things, and he said there were 3 of them, and they were going through my drawers in my kitchen, picking up utensils, plates, stuff like that, kind of examining things. And he said, and as soon as they were done, they just walked right out my back door. And he said, I said, well, and I thought this guy, he's feeding off my image, you know, he's done. So I went back and looked him up on the crypto site. Well, about 2 years earlier, before I even joined it, he had a picture drawing of this thing, and I showed it to my wife, and she's like, if that's what he drawed, it's exactly what you've seen. Well, so I reached out to him again and couldn't find no hide hair of him. No, his email kept coming back. He wasn't on the forum no more, nothing. So I thought that was really strange. You know, I can't, nothing. So fast forward, our friend that we both know, he came down and I was doing some gun work for him, and we were talking about things. I said, man, let me tell you about something, because we were talking, and he said, you know, I have a friend that, talking about you, that investigates these things or would like to hear your story, and I don't remember if it was you or him, that I think it was him that sent me the guy in Oregon. I could be wrong. Was it you or was it him?
I think it was me.
Yeah, so whenever your buddy, the guy in Oregon you hooked me up with, he said, don't tell me anything, let me tell you my story first. And I said, okay. So I think we're on a 3-way call, and he says, you know, when I was a young boy, I always wanted to see aliens. I always wanted to be aliens. And he said, one day I walk out and there's this silver sphere hovering above these pine trees in Oregon. And that's the first thing that got me. I thought, man, I thought maybe you talked to him, and he hadn't talked to you. And that was the first thing that clicked in my head, of this orb, that I'd say orb or silver ball that was up there. And he said, then he blacked out, and he said as his memory came back, he remembered seeing these creatures. And he had an artist draw a deal for him. Well, he sent me a picture of it. Well, my wife, again, she looks at the picture and said, this is exactly what you've seen. I mean, there's too close. The body dimensions, everything are exactly what's seen. So I think I've come to a point in my life that, because I didn't feel like this thing was, I felt that it was malevolent. I felt, it's one of the things when you get that hair standing up on your back, and you're scared to talk about something because you're afraid that it might be listening, that kind of stuff. That's how I kind of felt about this thing. I felt that it was kind of malevolent, and I never understood why it was doing the things it do. I mean, why would this creature be in an open field? Why would it be around this old house place? Why would it be across the street looking at my house, or being at our house, And that's always kind of scared me in a way, because it's almost like it was observing us. It was trying to, and then with this guy in Russia saying that there were 3 of them in his house, I sometimes wonder where this old house place was, where I first seen this thing. Had this thing came and visited them in the past? Is this something that's been coming back for generations, checking us out in those areas? Because, like I said, Aikens is a very small community. If someone come up and said they've seen something, you just blow them off, because you think, oh, they're just a country bumpkin, and they're going to say what they're going to say. So that's why I reached out to you to see if you had any similar stories or knew anybody. And when you first got here, Dad, I was telling you, I've been watching, I try not to watch the news and stuff, because it ain't PTSD, but I feel I get kind of anxiety when I see these things, because like I said, I've been seeing a lot of these silver orbs and stuff. People have been taking videos of these things flying around. And if these things are linked to this thing I've seen, I don't think they're here to be nice to us. I think they have another agenda. That's my own personal opinion, just on my own story. But I don't feel that they were something that's here to do good to us. I don't know why they're here or why it's going on. But like I said, all my life since that incident, I've always been kind of skittish about, I've always been aware of my surroundings, if that makes sense. I mean, people talk about PTSD and different things, and PTSD can be all kinds of things. And I believe a lot of people that have these experiences do get some kind of form of PTSD from it. Because
Absolutely.
they're constantly, you know, when it's dark outside, or whenever they go into an area they don't know, you think of these things. And like I said, I had lots of friends in the service that, you know, seen things in the sky, different things that we couldn't explain, different things, but nothing to the point of an encounter of like that, you know.
Of that magnitude,
yeah.
yeah.
So, and I think that what really kind of gets me the whole thing is, what I mainly focused on when I seen this thing, and what really keeps coming back, is how it walked. How it was able to kind of walk on fingers in a way. It was almost like it was walking on appendages. And it was almost like it was gliding, like it didn't have carrying a weight. Like we carry weight, we slump, we limp, we don't. This thing wasn't. This thing was just like, it was nothing. It was just moving across the property, and like it moved with the terrain. You know, it acted like if there was a log in front of it, or if there was brush or a rock or whatever, it could just move over it with ease. And see, that makes me think it's terrestrial, or, you know, from the earth, because it can move around. But then I think, well, maybe it came from a place that was worse than that, you know, or, you know, maybe more rocky or more, you know, vegetation. I don't know. But this thing, and like I said, its arms were long enough that it definitely could have moved on all fours. Its appendages, it just wasn't structured like a regular human. Its joints and stuff weren't. And that was what was really weird about it, is because while we got regular knees, this thing had another one below, so it probably could jump really well, I would think, and it was definitely balanced really well. It balanced really well, even though it was a large creature. It definitely seemed to be well balanced, you know. And,
well, let's bring it out then, and
okay.
You go ahead. I'll grab it here, and then that way.
Yeah, you know, and the thing is, like I was telling you earlier, some of my depictions of it and how I sculpted it could be, I'm just going off what I remember as a kid. And I'm sure the other people that have seen these, they look different or whatever, but the pictures that the guy in Oregon sent and the guy in Russia, it's too close. It's too close to this creature not to be the same species or of the same race.
Right.
But like I said, with its appendages, it almost had a joint down here, so it could manipulate. It's like a hand on its foot.
Okay.
And it had massive, because I remember it grasping the log. That's what got me, was, you know, you see people with shoes, you know, people wear shoes. But when you see something grasp a log, you think of like maybe an ape, a gorilla, or something like that.
Exactly.
But it was nothing like a gorilla. It is nothing like a gorilla. And, you know, its head, like I said, you can see its head, it's kind of cone shaped, but it ain't like your typical gray alien or something like that. And it was so, like I said, it could have been wearing some kind of membrane suit. Don't get, you know, it definitely could have been.
Sure.
But it was so tight in the moonlight, I could see it kind of glistening, reflecting off of it. There's like a tight membrane. That's why I said it's kind of like fascious around a muscle. And so I could see definition of its body to a point, you know. And whenever we go out there and show you, you'll notice that it's less than 100 yards that I was away from this thing. So physically, I could see it pretty well, especially in the moonlight. I couldn't tell color, you know, if it was black or white. It was dark, but I couldn't tell you the color of it, other than it had kind of a sheen to it. And its face, I can remember large nostrils, small mouth, large brow, and like I said, the head kind of came back to a point almost. And it could have been wearing a helmet. I don't know. You know, I mean, it was just a point of, I could make out the outline pretty good. But the main thing that got me was, like I said, the lower legs, the appendages, how it could grasp and lift over things without any effort. And that's kind of what got me too. If this thing was from Earth, we have gravity here. So gravity, even though we're fighting against it constantly, it still makes us slump. It still makes us have effort to move. This thing, like, it had no effort. Like maybe it came from someplace that had greater gravity than what we did, and so it feels super strong here. I don't know, you know. But that's kind of what I remember. And this was the best depiction I could make of it during the time. And
that's quite impressive.
Yeah, and I remember the structures on its shoulder, kind of the bulges and the bends, its knees. It's almost like, and I know this is going to sound really weird, but it's almost like their appendages they just don't do this. They could do this and this. So it could take its leg and rotate it out like it's a four-way joint to a two-way joint.
So it like humans, we have like the hips and the shoulders. is it can articulate in many different directions.
Yep.
But at the knee, it's just a hinge joint.
Yeah, it's just a hinge joint.
So you're saying that possibly the way it moves...
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Because when you're watching something walk, and it can raise its leg up and turn it like this to grasp something, and then the rest of its body follows that, and then it turns its leg back around and walks a different way. Like I said, that was the main thing that got me whenever I knew it wasn't a human. I knew it was human. First, the size of it, but I knew it wasn't human by the way it was walking. Okay. You know, it was... and light can play tricks on you. I know that, but it's almost like a negative that gets burned in your mind.
Sure.
Because at that age, I have not. I mean, I've been close to violence with my stepdad and the things that were going on in my life. So those things kind of embedded in my mind still too from my childhood. Mm-hmm. But this too did, because it was kind of like another negative, something I'd never experienced before that hit me so strong that it embedded it in my mind. You know, and I know that sounds strange, but that's the best way for me to explain it.
And then you're actually talking about a dozen or so eyewitnesses that I've spoken to. I've yet to sit down and interview them, but they had encounters as a child too, or a kid, as a teenager, and that is one of the main impactful memories they have of their childhood, is the encounter they had. So, you know, in making this, now what was your age again when you had this encounter?
I was 13. It was in 86, yeah. It was in 86. I believe I was 13.
And how long ago did you sculpt this that you're...
About 7 years ago. About 7 years ago. When I got out of the service, I finally got out of the service. I'm a 100% disabled veteran. Done my time, as if my son now is an infantry officer. But I got out, went through being in comas and different things through the service and bad health. And when I got out, a good friend of mine, we started up our business together. And my wife owns the business now. She runs it totally. But the thing was, I had more time to think about things. My mind was, I didn't have so much on my plate. And what happened was I started seeing things on the news. I started seeing things about these orbs and contact people were having made with stuff and everything. And the more I'd see these things, and the way the internet was, it got me really kind of like you got those triggers that trigger your mind on things, and that started triggering me of, I've got to come to some conclusion about this. I've got to come to some explanation. I've got to find out if other people have seen it. I've got to come get some peace with this.
Did it help?
It did. Oh, this helped tremendously, because I was able to take it out of my head and put it into something physical. So I didn't have to second guess myself. Well, was this someone in a costume, or was this a bear, you know, or something to that nature? I didn't have to second guess my mind anymore, because after I sculpted it, I sent the picture to my friend. He's like, Jeff, I believe 100% what you've seen, because no one in their right mind that has no artistic ability could sculpt something like that and be so precise on what you've seen. And I said, well, it is what I've seen, the best of my remembrance, and it allowed me to come to terms with it a little bit. And I tell, if there's anybody out there struggling with something you've seen, just get some clay and get a sculpting manual or whatever size it is, and just take your time, think of things, and let your hands do it. That's the only thing. I'm not an artist at all. I can't tell you how to be an artist, but it does bring a little bit of peace. It does bring a little bit of clarity to what I've seen. Matter of fact, I started listening to a deal called Coast to Coast, and I guess you're familiar with that radio station, and another one called, I can't remember the name of it, but they had some people on there from not Skywalker Ranch, it's Skinwalker Ranch. And there was a guy on there from, and he talked about something similar to what I've seen. So I called in on the show, and I was like, hey, you know, I'd like to discuss this with you and tell you what I've seen. And I told him the exact same story I just told you. And he said, Mr. Walters, I'm going to tell you right now. He said, I believe you 100% what you've seen. He said, don't let anybody ever make you second guess that. He said, we have seen things out there that have stepped through portals that we've been unable to get them on camera, because every time they do it, the camera, there's nothing that appears on the camera. It fuzzes out, or electronics don't work. But he said, people have reported for decades things coming across this through these open portal holes and different things else. A lot of the Native American population around there said they're shapeshifters and different things like that. And he said, I totally believe that these things that Native Americans were seeing may be these creatures, and they just named them whatever they could best explain what they were, you know?
Right.
And so they may have been visiting us for a lot longer time. And my son, you know, he's an anthropologist, like I was telling you, an archaeologist, and I was discussing with him about the Mesopotamians, because there have been statues and figurettes of these lizard-type creatures or of figurettes, even some of them breastfeeding, different things like that they found in these tombs. And so it's amazing that we've, through the history of mankind now that I've studied more and went into, these creatures have been seen since the very beginning. I mean, literally, India, they talk about it. Egypt, they talked about it. I mean, so every culture has had its run-in with these things. So when is it going to come to a point that our government, which they are, as we've seen, Congress has already started teams of looking into the UAP thing, and there's been several public bills now saying, yeah, we do have alien craft, we do have biological beings from them. So, like I was discussing with you earlier, what are we going to do with these families for years that said they were abducted and they were tested on and stuff, and they've been ridiculed and made fun of and everything else? And I didn't have that experience. I wasn't tested on or anything. I just had the experience of seeing this thing. And I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial, but I can't explain, other than the only other concept I thought of was at the end of the dinosaur period. We know that dinosaurs were, a lot of them were bipedal. They walked around. They know they could communicate. We know these things through science. Well, what's to say if they didn't evolve to some type of humanoid, just like they're saying that we evolved in evolution? And if they did, they'd be a lot older culture than us, and they'd be terrestrial, and their technology might have been a lot greater than us by now. But that's a fantasy thing. I just thought was thinking of, and a lot of people on that crypto forum kept calling them reptilians, reptilian soldiers, so they live in the grounds, that kind of stuff. Well, and it's kind of strange where Aikens is, not very far from that. There's a bunch of caves and different things around that area. Matter of fact, there were the government came in and concreted a bunch of hot springs up there because they had radion in them. They were radioactive. And when we drive over there, I'm going to show you an area where even my wife and other people in the community seen large military aircraft just disappear in that region. Like they come in, like they're landing somewhere out there. There's a big area that has a watchtower, all kinds of stuff. I don't know what they're doing back there. You know, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me why we would see these big cargo aircraft and all of a sudden you don't see them no more. They're landing. So I've been in the military. I know they can land these things on any type of strip. But this has been going on since I was a kid. I mean, I remember seeing large military aircraft come over. And so I'm not saying the military knows what's going on over there, but there's something to it.
There's something strange going on.
Yeah.
When you, it sounds almost like when this creature, that first dog got thrown out, getting back to the encounter itself, and then this dog goes back. You're not sure if it was just a neighbor dog.
No, matter of fact, I'd never seen the dogs before, and that I mean, it looked like German Shepherds to me. Like one of them looked like a German Shepherd because I raised German Shepherds. I know what they look at, their body, their images. But the other two I couldn't make out. But you know what? We never found any dead dogs. We never had any neighbors asking, "Hey, you seen my dog?" Because we're a pretty knit community around there.
Sure.
And there was never any animals missing. So I truly don't know. I truly don't know. What I don't understand is my stepdad raised pit bulls because he used to fight them, and them dogs were nothing but cowered in their pens during that morning. Because usually they would raise all kinds of hell if there was someone outside the door. And I remember that them dogs weren't doing nothing. They weren't barking, they weren't hollering, they were in their pens and they weren't doing nothing. So whatever this thing did, it just didn't scare the shit out of me. It scared the shit out of those dogs, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like this creature, it was on a mission. It was kind of the way it was moving. Yeah. Well, not only how it moved, but the direction, like paying these dogs no never mind. Yeah. And it's just they're around its legs, I'm sure, and it's just going. And
Lance, the thing when I take you out there and show you this, you're going to be going, it's a direct line to our house.
Is it?
It's a direct line. Where this thing was heading, I know the property so well. I was out there my whole childhood. And that's what scared me probably the most, because when you look where the creature was coming in the direction, it was almost like he was on a mission. He just, you know, like you said, the dogs weren't paying no mind. It was point A to point B kind of thing, navigating. And when I show you where it is, you can literally draw a map line directly to our house.
Well, I know it's speculative because you stayed, when you guys got out there, And it was you, your stepdad, and his friend.
Yeah, his friend. My stepdad is passed. The friend, I tried to contact him. My mother remembers it.
Okay.
And she'll talk to you. But like I said, I know a lot of things in the past from the last interview. A lot of people were extremely upset about my mother, and I don't blame them. I was too. When I came back from the service, I tried to make good with my mom of my past and the abuse that I occurred. I just ask people, when you do go on here and post on this, because if my mother finds it, she's tried to make good. She's tried to change her ways. And I don't want a lot of harm to come to her. I mean, life's too short to hold this.
Oh, absolutely.
And do I agree with it? No, I don't agree with it. My son, I've never hit him. I've never abused him. And I broke that cycle. Me and my wife both came from broken homes. And we've tried to make the best of what we can and make a better life for our child. You would think that would be the main thing I'd remember over something like this.
Yeah.
And I do remember that. But this is another thing that scared me to the point where it put that negative in my brain. Of what
it just added to it.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It's strange because I'm not saying this thing was out to come and watch my house. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you look at the line of approach, it goes directly towards our home. And our neighbor, he sits across the road. Our home's here, and it was coming this way from the pasture where we're at. I don't know if it was coming there, but that Monday morning, seeing that thing crouched down in the driveway across the way, watching us, it really kind of shook me.
Well, I mean, so you guys got out there about what time on Saturday?
Probably Saturday night. We got out there probably about 9:30, 10, somewhere in there.
When they bailed on you, what time was that roughly?
Probably about 11:30, somewhere. It wasn't very long. We just made it up and kind of sat down to watch the field.
So you were there about 11:30 till...
About 6:30, somewhere when the sun came up. Yeah.
So you were by yourself?
Yeah, by myself.
And the whole incident, between the time everyone saw this creature and they left and you still were fixated on it, watching it come across this field to the time
I was afraid not to watch it. I was afraid it was going to come towards me. You know, and so I watched this thing to a point, even after it went off into the woodline, into the darkness, I was scared it was circling back around. You know, I was scared. You know, I didn't know what this thing's intention was or whatever. I was expecting for this thing to reach up underneath that tree and drag me out, you know. And so I just huddled and wrapped myself around the bottom of this tree underneath the, you know, as far as close as I could get underneath the ground, underneath this cedar tree, and latched on it for dear life.
So you were inside the boughs. You were inside the boughs of the tree.
Yeah, boughs of the tree. Cedar tree comes down, it's real heavy.
Yeah, really
and
low.
Not like a pine or whatever. Cedar is a cedar.
All the way to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they're sticky, they're gooey, all that stuff, the pine. And I'd wrapped around, and they're evergreens, so they're heavily foliaged. Even in the wintertime, they don't shed. So I'd crawled underneath this tree and wrapped myself around the base of it as much as I could. And I had sap and all kinds of stuff, ticks, because ticks live in cedar trees during the winter. And so I was just engulfed with these insects by the time morning came. But I didn't care. I didn't make a sound. I just kept quiet and sat there. And I'm not ashamed to say I cried, man. I was scared. You know, I was definitely scared. I figured this thing was coming after me. But you know what got me, Lance, is when my stepdad and his friend took off, I want to say it kind of turned, but it didn't act like it really affected it. It kind of turned and maybe glanced at him or seen him, and it knew him. It knew it was there. So there was no intention to me not to think that it didn't know I wasn't there.
Gotcha.
I don't know how this thing can see, if it had night vision or whatever, you know, I don't know. But if it knew I was there, that just put it in my head that if it's seen them run off, it knows I'm there. I've got to hide. You know, I've got to do as best as I can. So about 6:30 in the morning when the sun started coming up, like I said, I booked it and I left everything. I ran and I didn't look back. I just kept going until I could get home. And like I said, when I entered the home, my mom started screaming at, "Where you been, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, you know, they left me out there. You left me out there. Did they tell you about the thing, you know? And she's like, they're saying it was a bear or whatever. I'm like, still, they left me out there, you know? And he was the one with the gun. He was the one with the gun. All I had was a battery. And
the gun and the light.
Yeah, they took the gun and the light. I just left me the battery, you know? And so it really became an eye-opener to her that Monday morning, because everything that we had said that night that happened, you know, she kind of brushed it off of, well, it must have been, you know, a bear or something, you know, we just misidentified, or maybe been somebody else in the wood. Because by this time, they had already put it in their mind that it was somebody out there, maybe a game ranger, or, they were making all kinds of excuses. And I don't think they were just making excuses for themselves. to be kind of like, you know, well, we didn't see what we really seen, but they were trying to calm me down too, because I was still a little deterred about this. I wouldn't, like we had hogs and I wouldn't even go feed the hogs. I said, you can beat me all you want. I ain't going out there. I ain't going out there to feed those pigs, you know, because I was scared to even leave the home at that point. And then when Monday morning came and this thing was sitting across the way, that kind of opened their eyes. When this thing stood up, and like I said, it wasn't setting on its rear, like you said, it was just kind of folded down like this. And its feet were kind of, I don't know how to explain it, it kind of bubbled up, but it was just sitting there and it was just kind of like this, doing this. And we thought first, because my stepdad did a lot in illegal marijuana. He had plants all over the place. He would use my room as a drying room during the harvesting season in the house, all kinds of stuff. There was times I'd be in my room and there'd be plants lining the wall from drying, you know, and but he had plants planted all out in the woods. And this is back when, you know, marijuana was illegal. And so they were constantly either drugged or high or whatever, you know, they were constantly on something. And so I think they realized then that this wasn't a drug trip. This was real. And my mom remembers the incident that morning. She remembers the thing, you know, standing up.
Sure.
I think Mom remembers the silver orb or whatever was in the sky, because we didn't know what it was.
When we started asking about it, everybody kept saying, well, it's probably a weather balloon. And I said, no, it wasn't a weather balloon. It was too big to be a weather balloon, and it wasn't a weather balloon. And it was there, and then it was gone, you know. And so, but we didn't, after that, we just never talked about it, you know.
Yeah.
And then
it was just, like I said, like looking into a mirror, it was that shiny. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Well, you definitely noticed it.
Yeah,
you know,
it was.
yeah.
It wasn't the sun, because the sun was up there and it was up there, you know. And so we both see it. And like I said, I ran across the way, as you can see, where my neighbor lives here, and got him to see it too. And then that following weekends, whenever everything happened, when we went poaching or hunting.
Well, Friday morning, I think it was like a Friday morning, Tony, there used to be no houses in here at all. And so he would go out on the front porch and take what he called take a leak right off the front porch.
Monday morning, Mom.
Was that Monday morning?
Yeah, Monday morning, because it was after the hunting when we seen it out there.
Well, he was a carpenter, and he got up really early because, you know, they have to get at their job site. And he went out there, and he come running back in and wanted his gun. And I said, what is it? And he said, I think it's a bear. And he went back out, but as soon as he went out, we saw it. It was on fours. It stood up, and it just took off in a run down
in this direction?
In that direction.
Oh, that direction. Yeah. Okay.
It just took off in a run. And I said, bears don't stand up to run. Mm-mm. And it was gone. I mean, it was so fast. It was like, and it scared both of us, you know. And then they went hunting. They went poaching. It was that weekend.
It was that weekend before all that happened. Before that Monday. It was that Saturday.
That's Saturday night.
Yep.
And to back up just a second, what you saw across the street here, or the road, that was on
Monday morning.
Yep. Okay.
He was getting ready for work. I'd got up to help him get up. Mom got
But it's actually, we've seen bear out here. It was bigger than a bear. I thought it was a horse. He thought it was a bear. I thought it was a horse. But it stood up.
Now that's big.
And that's what I mean with that whole thing. It looks like it's drawled its skin around it. You know, how a horse,
yeah,
you know,
exactly. Yes. Good point. But go ahead, please.
But anyway, it took off, like I said, as soon as we went out on the front porch with he had his gun, it took off. And it was gone fast. I mean, it was out of sight. And then, like I said, they had been hunting.
Saturday, that Saturday is whenever we went poaching. And like I said, I carried the battery on my back, and him and Ricky, I think it was Ricky Morse that was with us, went up there, and I carried the battery. Ricky had the light, and Tony had the gun. And we got up there, and that's when everything occurred up in the field.
Well, I know when Rick and Tony came in, Jeff wasn't with them. And I said, where's Jeff? And they was just like, they couldn't hardly talk. They were just so scared. And I said, well, where's Jeff? And he said, he's there, he's out there. I said, who's out there? You know, he said, he'll be here in a little bit, you know.
And then when the light came, I ran home, and Mom was here, and they were trying to come up with all kinds of excuses of what it could have been. So like I said, I got the most time of watching it cross the field. And like I said, until that Monday morning, until we seen it again, it was, you know, had no idea what, I mean, I still don't know what it was, you know.
So when that morning came and light came, he came blazing back. What was his state?
He was scared. He was trembling. He was like, you know, he was just a kid. He was just a kid. And he was just so scared, you know, and he was trying to tell me what he saw. And like I said, he was just, I don't know how to explain it to you. He was just, I was trying to comfort him because he was so scared.
He was notably shook up.
Oh, yes.
And you were trying to console him,
Yes.
calm him down, and then later he told you what he had seen and why he was shook up.
Right. Well, and Tony and Rick, they couldn't describe it. They were so scared, and they've even said, we can't tell nobody about this. They'll think we're crazy. We can't tell nobody about this.
So they said that the same day.
Yes. Yeah, they'll think we're crazy. You know, they'll think we've been on some kind of drugs or something. You know, we can't tell nobody.
And they didn't tell anybody.
No.
They just kind of kept it. So were you around when Jeff was telling them what he saw later after they left?
I never really had a good, like I said, I did have a good relationship with Tony because of the abuse and stuff. So I didn't talk to him. I talked to my mom more than he talked to him because he knew what he'd seen. They left me up there, and I mean they ran so hard they tore the wires off the light and left me there with the battery, and came back here. And I think they seen what it was. I know they seen what it was, but I think it scared them enough that they, for example, they didn't want people to think they were crazy. First off. And they tried to explain it out. They tried. I mean, I had Tony told me one time, "Was a bear with mange or whatever?" You know, no, it wasn't a bear. This thing was way bigger than a bear.
They tried to make it into something that
it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Yeah, and a lot of people do that just because it's too frightening to believe the reality of what they saw. So what do? You try to rationalize it in your head that nope, I saw a bear. That's what I saw. It had mange, and that's what I'm. And so you feel comfortable in your mind that then you're able to kind of put it away and lock it away and store it and never come back to it. You have to rationalize a reason, and because to believe otherwise, to say no, that was something that I've never seen before, it just kind of dwells on you. And people, that's what I see time and time again, especially in a group setting. I always say there's one person that wants to talk about it, especially kids, but the adults, a lot of them clam up. They don't want to talk about it, but the kid wants to talk about it because kids, I mean, granted, kids fib here and there, but when something like that is shocking and they see, they're not fibbing. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it in their disposition of how they are. You can see if they had fright, and they want to talk about it. What did I see? And the adults just go, nope, you know, and so I see this repeatedly over the years in doing this.
And I think it wasn't until that Monday morning that we seen it again, when it was across the way.
Right.
I mean, literally, it was right there, that it kind of put another fear of, you know, what is this and why is it sitting across the road watching us, you know? And like I said, I totally believe it knew what a firearm was, because when we used to have a gun rack here, and that's where he kept his gun. Well, Mom brought him his gun, and by the time she got out and I got out, it had to know that was a firearm, or it had to know it was some kind of weapon, because it got up and it was gone.
So as soon as it didn't get up and leave before you got to the door, it was after that gun was visible.
At first it looked like a man just sitting over there squatted down, is what it looked like. That's what I thought at first. And then when it stood up, you could tell it wasn't a man.
And Tony thought it was a bear because it was like bears will squat, you know, like on fours. But when I came out with the gun and handed it to him, it stood up on two legs, and then it took off in a run. But then to me, it was like it didn't have hair on it.
No.
You know, it was slick like a horse.
Just what you said.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And like I said, and exactly to the point like a horse is, you know, when you look at a horse, especially in the sunlight, you can see kind of its muscle texture and how it's, you know, underdeveloped under its skin. It's kind of like that. And like I said, when the sun came up, we looked for tracks, and there were no tracks. You can see where it parted the grass.
Whatever it was wasn't human.
No.
Because a human wouldn't, I mean, it was too tall.
That's what I was going to ask you, and I'm glad you kind of segue into that. What do you think based on all the animals you've ever seen in your life, what do you think you saw? I mean, how best to describe it on what you saw or where it came from, possibly?
I knew it was too tall to be a human. It was way too tall. It had long arms, you know, and it's like a horse, you know, but I don't know how to explain. I know that sounds crazy, but horses don't stand upright.
It wasn't anything that
Nothing I've ever seen
normally lives around here
No.
in Oklahoma.
No. No, I never, and that's the only time I ever saw it,
No.
you know, but, no,
Like
it
I said,
wasn't.
we've been on these woods. Mom's picked blackberries all up in here in bush. I mean, everything. And there have been a few times that we used to have this boxer, Tara. It was a family dog. And Mom would go out, and the dog would act really weird.
Yeah.
Like, really weird.
She'd go with me. She was very protective of me, very protective.
Okay.
And she'd go with me, and I'd go pick berries, or I gather herbs, and I do things like that. And she'd go with me, and she wouldn't bark, but she'd start acting funny, start acting fidgety. And I said, we need to go to the house, you know, and I'd get my stuff, and we'd start walking. And I could hear me walk and her walk, and I could hear something behind me walk. I'd stop, she'd stop, it would stop.
Really?
This happened more than once.
I was gonna. That was my next question. How long did this kind of?
It only happened a couple times, but it was right around the same time. And that's when Tony told me, he said, I don't care if you got Tara with you, don't go out in the woods. Because this used to be all woods, like I said, you know.
And this is where you were picking the berries and everything, kind of over here.
So something I remember, and I forgot all about it. Not very far from here, there were some people that had some pigs or sheep. I can't remember. And they had a huge, like, 10-foot chain link fence with wire on top of everything in their deal. And something was getting in the pen and killing and throwing the animals to the other side. And they knew it wasn't a human because they'd find the carcasses ate and stuff. But I don't know if it could have been a bear, but I'm just saying it's kind of weird that those things happen too at the same time. But
very coincidental.
I remember that now. I remember that was not very far from here. There were people saying that their livestock was being killed. But like I said, going back to what we seen, I can't explain what it was. I can only tell you what happened.
Sure.
And like I said, when I posted it on Facebook, Scotty's brother Clifton contacted me because I told him, I said, there's something that happened, and he said, kind of bothering me, you know. He said about the fireballs in the sky in the fall, and I said, well, I didn't know about any fireballs in the sky, but apparently they were talking about it. That there were several people that talked about it. Somebody said that they were driving one time and they seen these balls of fire just hanging in the sky at that time. I mean, there was a lot of weird stuff.
It's awful coincidental, based on what you saw and what you saw, and the dog acting strange. But prior to that, the fireballs in the sky and other people validating that too. You know, are they associated? Can't necessarily prove it, but it's awful darn close.
The strange thing with Tara, the dog, was if it was a person out there, this is what we couldn't grasp. If it had been a person out there, she would have growled.
Yeah.
She would have growled, she would have barked, and but she was just acting strange, and then like pushed me toward the house.
Just odd behavior compared to what you're normally used to seeing. And I always tell people, pay attention to your pets because they're like family. You know their behaviors. You know their tendencies, their characteristics, when they're hungry, when they're not, when someone's at your front door that's not neighborly.
Because when she'd go with me normally, she would, you know, go off and sniff around and, you know, hunt stuff and everything, you know, but she was not too far away from me.
I gotcha.
You know, but this, when we went out there that time, well, twice it happened. It followed us. She would go, like, right to my side. You know, like she wasn't going nowhere. She was right up against me. And I knew that there was something wrong. Like I said, when I take a few steps, because, you know, in the fall, it's kind of the grass and the leaves make noise. I'd hear myself and hear her, and then I'd hear this, whatever it was following us.
So, in hearing the story, what was your hunch? What's your suspicion of what this creature was? Mine, in considering the orb in the sky, several people around that region seeing possibly the same orb or orbs in the sky, the eyewitness account of what Jeff saw, his stepdad and his friend, and 2 days later, what his mother saw across the road, as well as the stepdad, my hunch is that it was extraterrestrial. It was not of this earth. And I've never heard anything like this before, especially being able to sit down with someone, let alone someone that sculpted out, created what they saw. I thought that was highly intriguing and terrifying. And it's something that when someone sees something like this, of course, they'll never forget it. But I hope you enjoyed the show. I've got many more shows like this coming. And let me know your thoughts. As always, guys, be safe out there. And in closing here, always remember, we're never alone in the wilderness, but we're also never alone in the skies. Take care, everybody.